Spiritual freedom. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution reads, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." Now, don't get concerned. I'm not going to go political on you. Okay? The founding fathers of the United States came from differing religious and spiritual beliefs. And having witnessed the state-sanctioned and state-required religions of other countries, they added this first and perhaps most important amendment. Now, here at Common Ground, one of our primary beliefs is that all paths lead to God, lead to spirit, lead to universal energies. In short, every name you can give to the divine is the same, and all paths lead to this divine power. Spiritual freedom is a divine truth. It is an immutable law that says you have the divine right to believe or not believe, to actively live a spiritual life. Spiritual freedom allows us to grow and expand as we are willing and to live our truths as we understand them. When we practice spiritual freedom, we also understand that our truths may not be the truths of others. And we allow others the same freedom to express their beliefs in spirituality as we desire them to enable us to express. Now, on some level, each of us knows this to be true. Yet how often do we find ourselves listening to someone and begin to judge their beliefs as wrong simply because they don't line up with our own? I know I've been guilty of this, and moreover, I know I'm not alone. Because someone else's truths are so far away from what we believe, we tend to judge others. We judge their spirituality, their religion, and at times their sanity based on what our truths are. We risk limiting our very own spiritual freedom when we attempt to define someone else's. In his book, Everything I Wanted to Know About Spirituality But Didn't Know How to Ask, a Spiritual Seeker's Guidebook, Peter Santos writes, "The spiritual freedom we seek cannot be found by grasping at, retreating to, or protecting ourselves, protecting our perceived safe spaces. Our freedom lies in remaining open continuously." What am I doing? Our freedom lies in remaining open continuously, not only to life's changes, but also to the divine light within us and others. This is our choice. Although often perceived as a weakness, being open and surrendering to the experience of the present moment is our greatest strength. By authentically living life in the now, we submit to divine guidance where we find the freedom to see everything equally and sacred in truth. I really like that passage. Within most religions and spiritual circles, we talk a lot about free will in one form or another. As a society, we banter the words freedom this and freedom that when it suits our needs and desires, while neglecting to understand that freedom is either a two-way street or it does not exist at all. To be spiritually free, we must not only know that we have the divine obligation to live our authentic lives and to embody our truths as we understand them, but we must also recognize and grant others the same consideration. Embracing spiritual freedom means, while we may not agree, we also do not denounce those beliefs as false or unspiritual. We do not demean their beliefs. We do not criticize their truths. To know spiritual freedom is to empower that freedom for all. Believing and knowing that ultimately all paths lead to the same place. Every name that has ever been given to the divine and every master teacher quoted comes from and returns to the same source. Each a road to enlightenment, each a journey to understanding, and all to a place of complete knowledge and love. The Dalai Lama said, All major religious traditions carry basically the same message. That is love, compassion, and forgiveness. The important thing is they should be a part of your daily lives. And I found this passage from A Course in Miracles. It said, "You are free to believe what you choose, and what you do attests to what you believe." Over the years, I have studied a multitude of religions and spiritual beliefs. From an early age, I was drawn to the spirituality of the ancients, that which today we read as mythology. And as a child, I was fascinated and inspired by the Roman and Greek pantheons, both of which were almost identical except for the change in names. In fact, so equal were these two separate religions that it became hard sometimes for me to separate the names into the correct religion because even their stories were much the same. Now, I had much the same issue when I began to study and learn the ancient Sumerian pantheon. And again, when I lived in Guatemala after I read the Popol Vuh, I was amazed that the Mayan religion was also not that different. Again, all of these stories continue to repeat themselves, told to a different audience and in language that would be understood by those people. Spiritual freedom gave me permission to study these ancient and in some cases extinct religions. And from these studies, my idea of divinity expanded far beyond what might have otherwise. I love what I knew I was going to mess this up. De Covarte says, "It is not the answer that enlightens, but the question." Now, I began my quest for spiritual understanding not because I was overly interested in ancient religions. From a very early age, being raised in a metaphysical household and by a minister, I was taught what to believe. The problem was, not everything I was taught resonated with who I was. In fact, some of what I was taught to believe went against every cell in my body. These were not my truths. They were someone else's. From an early age, I had questions. Not everything added up. Now, growing up in the 70s and 80s in the South, I also became acquainted with several different denominations of Christianity, whose views were very different from mine. And at the same time, these differing views of Christianity clashed between themselves. Spiritually and religiously, I was considered a heathen by all of my friends and their families. It was not until puberty kicked in and I was forced to deal with, or not deal, with my sexual orientation that I began a journey of spiritual self-discovery. I was seeking answers to questions that no one had or wanted to give me the answer I was seeking. Now, a friend of mine would call this answer shopping. And in a way, I was. Maybe. The thing is, I knew the answer. The answer was within me all along. What I was looking for was the proof or validation that what I believed, what I felt, and the person I needed to be was acceptable. So honestly, I wasn't looking for the answer, but rather the validation to what I already knew to be true for me. The search for validation was not a quick and easy road, and at times I abandoned the quest. I stopped looking, and at times even stopped believing. It was easier not to believe than it was to believe in a higher power that didn't believe in me. Even this part of my spiritual path, and I was free, even this was part of my spiritual path, and I was free to take this seemingly detour from spirit because, as mentioned before, we have the divine right to spiritual freedom in whatever form it takes in our lives. Peter Shepard writes, "Survival is for the human animal, fear the motivation. For the spiritual being, survival is irrelevant. Curiosity, compassion, and creativity are the name of the game. Unconditional love, the motivation." I can honestly say that my initial drive into understanding spirituality through the ancient religions and texts was directly linked to my fear of not being accepted. from my need to survive in a hostile world. Even my turning my back on, or as I like to call it today, taking a pause in my spiritual journey, was connected to my microscopic view of the world and believing that everything centered around me. Fear, doubt, and worry kept me from experiencing true spiritual freedom because I was focused more on finding the answers that suited me rather than understanding my place in the world. I sought validation rather than a union with the divine. Richard Carlson writes, "Choose being kind over being right, and you'll be right every time." To truly know and experience spiritual freedom, you must recognize the divine right for others to be spiritually free, to travel their journey and their truth as they understand it. You are not called to, nor are you required to take their truths as your own. However, if you listen with an open mind, a clear heart, and with a desire to understand others as you wish to be recognized, you might find that some of their truths, in fact, resonate with you and become yours as well. Your spiritual self, your divine self, will know what feels right to you in the moment. Fully knowing and understanding that what is your truth right now can evolve and change in time. Until you can willingly recognize the divine right of others to embrace their spiritual freedoms, you will not fully experience it in your life. You cannot have what you do not give, and you cannot teach what you do not know. We talk all the time here about how we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And if we agree that as spiritual beings living this human experience, everything we do is spiritual, then the path to spiritual freedom becomes greatly expanded. We move from the microscopic view of the world as it revolves around us to the macroscopic view, developing our understanding and awareness far beyond the confines of our human experience. All of our actions, all of our thoughts are a reflection of our spirituality. We can treat others, how we treat others speaks more about our beliefs and our truths do any words ever spoken or written. Nathaniel Branden writes, "How do we nurture the soul? By revering our own life, by learning to love it all, not only the joys and the victories, but also the pain and the struggles." We understand spiritual freedom by reviewing and honoring our lives, our beliefs, and our truths, taking notice of where we live and express our authentic selves, and where we hide behind masks to keep others from seeing our truths as we understand them. Reviewing does not mean regretting. It means looking back to know who we were, to understand who we have become, and determine who we want to be. We make course corrections, spiritual tweaks, a few field trips along the way, and continue to grow and learn. Recognizing your spiritual freedom illuminates the world around you, as well as the many paths, detours, and journeys that your soul will travel on its journey home to Source. Now, I'd like to share with you a true story that will illustrate spiritual freedom. Growing up, my mother had a Siamese cat. My mother's connection to this cat was very strong. In fact, I was convinced that my mother was a witch and that the cat was her familiar, simply because I could never get away with doing anything wrong if the cat saw me. It was rather freaky. And the mischievous boy that I was, I did a lot I shouldn't. And I got caught way more often than my friends. I still swear that this cat had a psychic link to my mother. Now, while we were living in Guatemala, my mother's cat somehow got out. My mother was beside herself with grief. Seriously. It was as if she had just lost a child. or at least what I expected she would be, like losing one. Now, remember, many of you have heard me talk about my mother and how educated she was, how spiritual she was, and overall, one of the greatest spiritual teachers I've ever had the pleasure of knowing. Even when I didn't recognize it, agree with her, and even at times I did not want her guidance. So here's the thing. She was desperate. And in her desperation, she went to the local bruja, which is witch, for advice and guidance. Immediately, I knew she'd cracked. The bruja told her that the cat would find her way home as long as she did the following. Stand in the front yard, remove your right shoe, and call your cat's name into the shoe 3 times. Seriously, I was 16 and I died laughing. Okay? Everybody but my mother was laughing. But she did. She called into her shoe 3 times, and the next day there was a knock on the door. Someone had found her cat and brought her baby home. Now, did calling into her shoe return the cat? I don't know. Personally, I think it was the energy and love my mother put into the action which created the call to the universe that brought her beloved pet home. It doesn't really matter if I believed it at the time or if she believed it later in life. At the moment, it was her right to spiritual freedom that allowed her to believe, if only for that one instance in her life, that doing something so different from what she would ever do before or after. We might have laughed as she did it, and we did. And I still laugh today when I remember it. Yet when the topic of spiritual freedom was given to me for this morning's talk, this was the first story that came to mind. And it's a lesson that I won't soon forget. Did I laugh? Did I laugh at someone because what they did seemed old or different to me? I did. It might not be my truth. It might not be what I know and believe, but each of us has an obligation to allow others to be who they are, to live their truths, to be their authentic divine self in the moment, and to always recognize that no matter what, we are all light, and spiritually, we are all free. In closing, I'd like to leave you with a final thought as written by Emmett Fox. There is no difficulty that enough love will not conquer, no disease that enough love will not heal, no door that enough love will not open, no gulf that enough love will not bridge, no wall that enough love will not throw down, no sin that enough love will not redeem. At the end of the day, with all of its twists and turns, the many explanations and understandings of what spiritual freedom is, it comes down to love. When we allow love to guide our actions, we express spiritual freedom and grant that freedom to others to live, to believe, and be their authentic selves as they understand it. And so with that, may your week be blessed with love, gratitude, and many opportunities to express and experience spiritual freedom. The divine in me recognizes the divine in you. Peace be with you. Shalom, namaste.